Hi all, I'd like to show you a game which I think you'll get a kick out of. It's Sergey Dolmatov again, this time playing black against Magnus Carlsen when Magnus was just 13 years old. Still a very strong, high rated 13-year-old, FIDE rated 2484 at the time of this game in the third Aeroflot Festival held in Moscow 2004. Dolmatov was now an established GM at 2591. And of course, as we know, he was the world junior chess champion in 1978. So here he is playing black, very experienced now as a grandmaster. Magnus Carlsen kicks off with knight f3, and Sergey plays a very aggressive f5, making a statement. He wants a fighting game, playing the Dutch defence. Magnus now responds with a move which is quite low on the popularity scale in response to this, but it's quite interesting. It has reasonably good results. It's the move d3. You might think, what on earth is the move d3? Surely white should be trying to control squares like e5, more classically in the centre. The thing is, this pawn can now be challenged with an e4 coming up. And in fact, we see this after d6, we see e4. Black doesn't really want to take this pawn now, liberate this bishop on this diagonal. Black actually played e5, which is the most popular response. Knight c3 is played. Now usually black plays knight f6, trying to get on with things on the king's side. For example, knight f6, we could have e takes, bishop takes, and d4, but we have a slightly different game here. Black actually chooses to develop the queenside knight first, and we still get this mechanism. Magnus plays e takes f5. So the idea of this, capturing away from the centre, seemingly developing black's bishop free of charge, is to play this move d4 now, which gives this bishop scope to come out to c4 potentially, and also putting pressure on e5, provoking black to play e4. But e4 isn't a particularly good move here. If e4 is played, white can get control of that f4 square and actually not even move the knight here for an advantage. Let's put on a kibitzer actually. White can actually play d5 with a small advantage. For example, e takes, d takes, b takes, queen takes f3. White's doing quite well here with pressure on c6 if the bishop has to go back. Bishop a6, white standing quite well here. So let's go back. After this move d4, black actually played knight takes d4. This is not a very popular position, not a well-trodden position, so white actually has, though, a small advantage out of the opening. After knight takes e takes, queen takes d4. Common advice is it's not advisable to get the queen out too early, but here, how is the queen actually attacked? It's in a fine central position, viewing both sides of the board, kind of tying black down a little bit, making moves like bishop e7 or the rook move difficult from d4. It's difficult to challenge the queen here, and also it's got queen a4 check if needed. If queen f6, that might be a useful move. So getting the queen out also, of course, facilitates castling queenside rapidly to make use of this rook potentially, as well as this rook. So this is potentially quite a dangerous position already at move 8. Black now plays knight f6, and actually another idea might have been just c6, just to try and discourage bishop c4 with d5. So for example, if c6, bishop c4, we can play d5 here. And you might also wonder, well, in all this, what about this c2 pawn? It's a bit dangerous for black to take on c2 in this position, although the queen has left the protection of c2. If bishop takes c2, white can actually get a reasonably good advantage with various moves, just treating it like gambit. Even queen e3 check in this position, this is quite dangerous for black. This c file is quite dangerous, and it's difficult for black not to lose the pawn back without incurring a disadvantage. This kind of position, f3 here, and the knight's coming out or white's going to get an advantage whatever happens here. It's with the two bishops. So this taking this pawn is not very advisable on c2. So black, okay, played knight f6. We saw bishop c4, and now this plan to try and restrict this bishop potentially on the diagonal. c6 is played, but it also supports queen b6 and maybe b5 as well. And in fact, we see after bishop g5, d5 is not actually technically on the cards at the moment, because this bishop is loose on f5. If d5 trying to blunt that bishop, then actually even better than playing queen e5 check, because the king's in the centre at the moment, is just a castle here. And now the threat is queen e5 check, picking up the bishop. And this is quite unpleasant for black, actually, this position. So that's not a great idea to play for d5 there. So in fact, after bishop g5, black plays b5, and the bishop drops back. And here, with the bishop dropping back, there's a kind of weakness to the last move, that this bishop is no longer controlling e2. And black could have tapped into this. And I think this is one of the best moves in the position. Black at this point, at move 11, could consider queen e7 check, just to kick the king to f1 and then cheekily castle the queen side. The queen's holding a7, there's no problem with a7. Black should be okay here. It's not there's no major serious problem going on in this position. If rook e1, queen d7, there's nothing too serious. Losing a pawn here is no big deal. Black would get good compensation there. So okay, instead though, black played bishop e7. This is arguably the first major mistake, because now it's actually much more difficult to achieve castling queenside for black, and white has the luxury of castling queenside, and with multiple threats here now in the position, including just centralizing the rook. You know, the king's not going anywhere at the moment, can't castle kingside. g4 might be on the cards as well, because if bishop takes g4, bishop takes f6, and this is hanging, this is creating some problems. So in this position we see queen d7 trying to castle queenside, but now after rook he1, in fact technically there's a big issue now with castling queenside. If black castles queenside here, then actually the move g4 is exceptionally powerful. There's a pin on e7 here, so knight takes g4, there's rook takes e7, thank you very much, winning a piece. And on bishop takes g4, there's rook takes e7, creating that pin, which can be exploited now with queen takes g4 check. And this is very nice for white. White's up on material, doing very well there indeed. And there's even potential for bishop e6 if black is not careful in this position. For example, rook d7, bishop e6, just pinning and attacking the knight. So black has to tread carefully there and his material down in any case. So for this reason, the rather diabolical looking king d8 is chosen in this position. Just one more try. If d5, as an example here, this is not appetizing. Bishop takes, and then we just exploit the pin on e7 with queen takes f6, and this is quite crushing indeed. For example, rook f8, we can now play rook takes e7 and start dismantling black like this. All sorts of things are hanging here. So the king must leave e8, but it's a bit sad that black is thinking that king d8 is the best move here. Now Magnus meets out some forcing move punishment in any case. He plays now rook takes e7, so creating a horrible pin on the knight. Queen takes e7 is played. And now there's a double attack. There's two double attack mechanisms which could have been used here. Queen c5 attacking f5 and d6, or queen f4. Magnus chooses what might be a little bit better actually, queen f4, because we've also got pressure on f6 as well to boot here, as well as the double attack on f5 and d6. So what can actually black do in this position? It's very limited options indeed. He tries bishop d7, and now Magnus could have played rook takes d6. It's a very, very nice position, but maybe black's going to wriggle a little bit after king c8. There's some wriggling opportunity. If rook takes f6, g takes, there's always a queen e1 check possibility here, or rook f8, and actually black's better. So white's got to tread quite carefully here after rook takes d6. But Magnus instead plays a much more clear-cut continuation, much more powerful, in fact, than rook takes d6, at least from a human point of view, to cut out complications. It's knight e4. What does black actually do? There's a huge threat now just taking on f6 or taking on d6 with either the rook or the knight, or taking on f6 with the bishop and then taking d6. It's horrendous there. So black's d6 is under fire. He plays d5 and invites what seems to be a horrible move, knight takes f6. And there's only one thing that black can do now. This is the idea, to play h6 here. So if white plays knight takes d7, then that's a slip up. H takes g, and actually black's on the board again. Whereas the knight actually going, the knight's kind of stranded. That would be blowing the advantage in one fell swoop, in fact. But Magnus plays the best move. He plays bishop h4, and he's got another idea. There's a weakness of the last move created here from g5. When a pawn moves like this, it's exposing things either on the left or the right if there's rooks on an adjacent file. But when a pawn moves, you can also look at the diagonals. And here there's a weakness of the last move on the diagonal with that pawn moving, exposing a rook which wasn't previously an issue at all in the position. And we see now that after queen d4, Magnus is staring at that rook. He's penetrated that weakness of the last move very, very incisively. So incisively that black was convinced his position is now busted and actually resigned here. The reason, for example, if g takes h4, knight takes d5 hits the queen and the rook, and black's going to be at least 2 pawns down with a wrecked position. If c takes d5, for example, queen takes, queen e8, check, and we can pick up another pawn here, and d5 is very, very loose. So we're going to be like 3 pawns down, or rather Dolmatov, Paul Dolmatov, is going to be 3 pawns down here. Engines have this as minus 6 for black, plus 6 for white or more. This is a disaster, this position, and the king has still got problems with bishop c6 as well, potentially on the cards. So in this position after queen d4, black resigned. And Magnus at 13 impressed IM and FIDE senior trainer Alexander Sergeyevich Nikitin, who was Kasparov's trainer. He said, Nikitin, he was watching this game and he started to go around the tournament hall breathlessly saying, with his score sheet of the game with him, "This is the game of a genius." Comments or questions on YouTube? Thanks very much.